The lights were warm, the applause loud, and the smiles rehearsed. Janet Jackson stepped onto the set of The View, dressed in quiet grace, her walk steady, her eyes calm. This was meant to be her moment to return, not just to daytime television, but to the conversation that had left her behind for years. The producers called it a legacy sit-down, a tribute to her decades in music, film, and cultural influence. The audience cheered louder than usual. It felt like forgiveness. Or at least, that was the hope. At first, everything followed the script. Sunny Hostin opened with soft questions about Janet's new documentary, her journey into motherhood, her time away from the spotlight. Janet answered with her usual poise, a gentle smile playing at her lips. She spoke slowly, intentionally, every word chosen with care. Her voice was calm but carried weight. The crowd listened closely. Even the co-hosts leaned in. For a moment, it seemed like healing was finally in reach. Then came the shift. Joy Behar tilted her head slightly, leaned forward, and smiled not warmly, but with something sharper. Her voice cut through the calm with a question wrapped in politeness, but dipped in something else. Janet, don't you think your family name shielded you from real accountability after the Super Bowl? I mean, a lot of people think you never really addressed it. The studio fell quiet in an instant. No one laughed. No one shifted in their chairs. Even the camera seemed to hesitate. Janet blinked once, slowly. Her smile vanished, but her face didn't move. The silence stretched for several seconds, thick and heavy. Then she spoke. "You think I got protected?" she said quietly. "I got erased." The room froze. The sentence hit like glass breaking. Not loud, not angry, but sharp enough to cut the air in half. No one knew what to do. Even the seasoned hosts seemed unsure. Joy tried to backpedal, chuckling nervously. No. I just meant that, well, the press was hard on you, but you didn't really speak up. People wanted more from you." Janet turned toward her slowly. Her eyes were steady. "You wanted more from me?" "Lost everything. I stayed silent because when a black woman defends herself, she's called angry. When she doesn't speak, she's called weak. Either way, you already wrote the ending." A murmur moved through the audience like a shiver. One of the producers appeared behind the cameras, motioning to cut to commercial. But no one moved. Janet's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You talk about protection. I watched networks erase my name while they kept giving deals to men with worse records. I lost tours. I lost endorsements. I lost the right to speak without being blamed." Sunny looked down at her notes, clearly shaken. Joy opened her mouth, but couldn't find the words. Only Whoopi, seated at the far end of the table, seemed to understand what was happening. She didn't interrupt. She didn't blink. Janet folded her hands together, calm but unshakable. "I came here thinking maybe things had changed," she said. "But now I'm not so sure." And just like that, the energy in the studio was different. The smiles had disappeared. The applause from earlier now felt like a distant memory. Had shifted the entire tone of the interview, not with anger, but with truth. A new silence settled in the room. One that couldn't be edited out. One that felt permanent. One that warned the rest of this conversation wouldn't go the way they had planned. The producers didn't cut to commercial. They should have. But they didn't. Maybe they were too stunned. Maybe they hoped things would smooth over. Or maybe they knew this was already beyond control. The audience sat silent. Phones were out. Everyone knew they were witnessing something real too real for daytime television. Joy Behar looked down, then back up, her usual confidence replaced by something closer to panic. "Jeanette," she began, her voice a little shaky. "I didn't mean to say you weren't hurt by what happened. Just trying to say the public, some people, they didn't understand your silence." Janet didn't nod. She didn't offer relief. She stayed perfectly still. "Why do I owe anyone understanding?" she asked. "When I speak, I'm punished." When I don't, I'm erased. What answer would have been good enough? What apology would have satisfied the narrative you all created? For me, no one responded. Even Sunny, who had started the interview with so much warmth, looked shaken now. She tried to pivot. "Let's talk about your music," she said quickly. "Your new work due. You feel like your music gives you the voice the media never allowed you to have." But Janet was done dodging. "This isn't about music," she said. "You didn't bring me here to talk about the art. You brought me here to make peace with your guilt." The words hit hard. "I didn't ask for this," she continued. "I didn't ask to be this symbol for a moment America still hasn't forgiven itself for. But you made me that. Then you locked me out of the conversation." Anna Navarro leaned forward, trying to offer a bridge. "Janet, I think what we're trying to do, what The View always tries to do, is open the table to tough truths. I think. We're just struggling to say that we've all grown." Janet smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was tired. "Honest. You've grown," she said. "Then say it. Say that what happened to me wasn't fair. Say that it wasn't just a wardrobe malfunction or a cultural moment. Say it was targeted. Say it was misogynistic. Say it was racist. Say you watched it happen and said nothing because it was easier to let me fall alone." Again, silence. No one on the panel spoke. Not even Whoopi. Janet looked around the studio. Her eyes scanned the audience. Some people looked down. Some stared back with wide, frozen eyes. One woman in the front row held her breath, visibly moved. "You want to reclaim me now?" Janet said softly. "You want the redemption arc, the comeback story. But the cost of that comeback shouldn't be me having to bleed all over again for your ratings." Whoopi finally spoke, her voice slow and measured. "Janet, I hear you." Janet turned toward her. "Then say it." Whoopi blinked. "You were wronged." "That's not enough," Janet said. "Be honest. Be brave. Because if you won't say the full truth, you're still part of the silence." The air was heavy. The kind of air that happens right before thunder. Joy looked like she wanted to speak again, but didn't. Sunny kept her eyes down. Anna glanced at a producer, unsure what to do, but Janet stood. Not rushed, not dramatic. Just final. She adjusted her mic, removed it slowly, and set it gently on the table. Then she looked into the camera, not at the hosts, not at the crowd, but right through the lens, like she knew who was watching at home. To the young women watching this, she said, "You don't owe anyone your pain just to be seen. Don't let the world tell you your silence is weakness. Sometimes it's survival." Then she turned and walked off stage. No music played. No one clapped. The set didn't know whether to chase after her or just fade to black. Producers stood frozen behind the cameras. Crew members stared. One host whispered something to another, but the microphones were already cut. It wasn't a meltdown. It wasn't an accident. It was a reckoning. And by the time the emergency commercial rolled a jarring to cheerful ad for a breakfast cereal, Twitter had already exploded. Clips flooded the internet. Janet walks out. The View implodes. Janet Jackson just ended daytime TV. Hashtags appeared within minutes. Hashtag Janet spoke. Hashtag respect Black women. Hashtag erased. No more. Some viewers cheered. Some criticized. But no one ignored it. That moment's 6 minutes of quiet fury became the most talked about segment in The View's history. And the question echoed louder than any applause could have. Why did it take 2 decades for someone to finally let her speak? The View's emergency commercial break ended. But nothing felt normal when the show returned. Joy Behar sat frozen, clutching her cue cards like they were going to protect her. Anna Navarro blinked, her voice caught in her throat. Sunny Hostin attempted a smile, but it barely moved. Whoopi Goldberg leaned slightly forward, her eyes on the desk, not the camera. The chairs still held the shape of what had just happened. The camera panned across the host slowly, as if daring any one of them to speak. Finally, Joy cleared her throat and began. Well, welcome back. It felt forced. She tried again. We just had a powerful moment with Janet Jackson. It's safe to say things didn't go as planned. It was all she could manage. Before Whoopi interrupted. No, they didn't. But maybe they went the way they needed to. The comment hung in the air. Joy looked at her sideways, unsure whether that was support or criticism. The producers had sent a note on the teleprompter, telling them to pivot to a lighter topic: celebrity weddings. Or a new streaming show, but no one followed it. Anna finally leaned forward. I just want to say this as clearly as I can. Janet was right to speak her truth. We asked her here to celebrate her, and instead we put her on trial. Sunny nodded slowly. She said something I can't stop thinking about. You're right. The ending before I even opened my mouth. How many women of color, how many survivors feel that exact thing every day? Joy shifted uncomfortably. I didn't mean to hurt her. I know, Whoopi said, but you did. The audience was dead silent. Even in a space built for chatter, laughter, and clashing opinions, this was different. No one wanted to break what had just been broken. Then came the knock on the studio door. A stagehand rushed over to the panel with a small piece of paper. Whoopi read it, her eyebrows rising slightly. She's issued a statement. She said, Joy. Turned who? Janet. Whoopi replied. She posted on Instagram while we were on commercial. It's already going viral. The screen behind the hosts changed to a screenshot of Janet's post. It was just black text on white. I walked away today not because I was angry, but because I was tired of performing pain for people who never heard me scream. I was told this interview would be about healing. What I found instead was the same silence wearing a microphone. I'm done auditioning for empathy. No hashtags, no emojis, just those words. The audience gasped again softly this time, like the wind had shifted. Backstage, the control room was panicking. Ratings were spiking. Millions were watching the live feed, more than The View had pulled in months. Newsrooms were scrambling to download clips. Hashtags were now trending globally. Even mainstream journalists were jumping in. CNN's homepage updated within 10 minutes. Janet Jackson confronts The View, a national reckoning on race, gender, and silence. Fox News spun it differently. Janet Jackson storms off. Said after tough questions, is daytime TV too sensitive? Social media divided instantly. Some users blasted Joy Behar as a symbol of liberal hypocrisy. Others praised Whoopi and Sunny for staying grounded. But all eyes were on Janet. Within an hour, Beyoncé reposted the clip of Janet's quiet exit with the caption, "We hear you, Queen." Michelle Obama tweeted, "Dignity, power, truth. Janet's voice matters now and always." Meanwhile, networks scrambled for statements. Journalists demanded comment from ABC's executive producers. Even rival shows like The Talk and Good Morning America planned emergency segments around the moment. But Janet, she stayed silent after that post. She didn't tweet again. She didn't go live. She didn't take follow-up interviews. She let the clip speak. Let the silence do the shouting. That silence made producers nervous. ABC's board called an emergency meeting that afternoon. Behind closed doors, executives debated whether the segment should be pulled from official platforms. One worried about advertiser blowback. Another said taking it down would be an admission of guilt. A third reminded the group, "We booked Janet for healing. We got a revolution." Back on set, The View tried to continue. They brought in the next guest of fashion. Designer promoting a new line, but no one was paying attention. Even the guest looked uncomfortable, sensing she was on stage just minutes after a cultural earthquake. Halfway through her segment, she said gently, "Before we talk about clothes, I just want to say, I grew up watching Janet. She gave women, like me, courage. Seeing her walk off like that tit wasn't weakness, that was leadership. The audience clapped for the first time that day. A ripple of relief passed through the room. It wasn't over. Janet's moment would not just fade like so. Many viral clips, it was already becoming something bigger. A debate, a protest, a mirror, and somewhere offset away from cameras, Janet Jackson sat in silence. Not the kind that erases, but the kind that echoes. The next morning, the clip of Janet walking off The View had reached over 90 million views. It was no longer a trending moment. It was a cultural flashpoint. Talk radio shows debated it. Podcasts released emergency episodes. News anchors across networks replayed her words again and again. You think I got protected? I got erased. At breakfast tables, in offices, on subway rides, people were talking about Janet, about Black women in media, about who gets to ask the questions and who pays the price for answering them. But inside ABC headquarters, things were unraveling. The View's executive producer, Martin Red, sat in his glass-walled office staring at a tablet screen looping. The incident. His assistant had just walked in, holding a printed report, sentiment analysis, brand reactions. Advertiser concerns. He barely glanced at it. They want a response, she said softly. A real one. Not just from Joy, from the network. Martin nodded. What's legal saying? She hesitated. They're worried if we issue an apology, it admits guilt. If we don't, we're accused of gaslighting a Black woman on national TV. So we're paralyzed. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. At that moment, The View's senior hosts were gathering in a separate conference room. Joy Behar was already seated, arms crossed, face pale. Whoopi arrived next, with sunglasses on and coffee in hand. Sunny Hostin and Anna Navarro entered together, whispering. The door closed. Cameras weren't allowed. This wasn't a show anymore. This was damage control. Joy broke the silence first. I never meant to hurt her, she said quickly, like rehearsing a line she'd already told herself 50 times. It was a question, just a question. It wasn't the question, Sunny said firmly. It was the tone, the moment. The fact that we invited her here under one storyline delivered another. Joy's face flushed. So now I'm a villain. No. Whoopi said, you're not the villain, but you became the symbol. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but paused. For once, she didn't have a comeback. Anna leaned forward. We have a chance here, not to cover it up, not to defend it, but to face it. But what does that look like? Joy asked. Full-blown apology tour. A live town hall. We'll look weak. No, Sunny said again. We'll look human. While the show's hosts argued behind closed doors, a different storm was brewing outside the building. At Union Square in Manhattan, a crowd had started to form. First, it was just a few college students with cardboard signs quoting Janet's words. But by noon, it was thousands of activists, artists, young Black women holding handwritten posters that said, I got erased too. Stop asking Black women to bleed for your ratings. Janet walked. We rise. News crews arrived. Drones hovered overhead. Celebrities joined via FaceTime. Janelle Monáe posted a video calling the interview a televised microaggression. Taraji P. Henson recorded a tearful message. Janet didn't walk away. She walked through us all of us because we weren't standing there when she needed us most. By afternoon, the White House press secretary was asked about the moment. She responded carefully. Janet Jackson's courage reminded the nation of a painful truth, that silence when shaped by power can be louder than any scream. That single sentence lit up the internet again, and yet, Janet remained quiet. She didn't join the protest, she didn't go live, she didn't call in. But that night, her team sent an email to The View's producers. The subject line was just one word: statement. The document attached wasn't angry, wasn't defensive, was clear, deliberate, and sharp, like every word she'd spoken on air. I came to that table with hope. Hope that the years had changed the way we speak to each other, especially how we speak to Black women who dared to survive the fire and return. But what I saw was not healing. It was a setup. And I know what a setup feels like. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm not asking to be protected. I'm demanding that we stop rewriting the silence as complicity. You didn't see a meltdown. You saw a line drawn. I walked off set, but don't mistake that walk as retreat. That was the beginning. The next morning, newspapers across the country printed the statement in full. The New York Times ran it on the front page. The Washington Post compared her moment to Anita Hill's testimony, a reckoning on air. But the most powerful response didn't come from another star or a politician. It came from a 17-year-old girl in Detroit who posted a short video with tears in her eyes. Janet Jackson said what my mom never could. She said it without shouting. She said it with her walk. That clip alone crossed 40 million views in 24 hours. ABC still hadn't aired another word about the incident, but the world already had. A week passed, then another. No press tours, no studio apologies, no follow-up interviews from Janet Jackson. She stayed quiet, but the world kept talking. The empty table broadcast from The View was now considered a cultural artifact. University media studies classes were already dissecting it. Newsrooms debated whether silence could be the most powerful form of protest. Activists clipped the still frame of the show's closing shot and made it their rallying banner, the bare table. Untouched microphones and cold studio lights, all frozen in silence. It was not just the end of a daytime talk show. It was the end of an era where media believed it could control every story, reshape every narrative, and interrupt women who refused to perform pain for profit. Janet had changed that, not with a scream, not with a speech, but by simply getting up and walking away. The entertainment world scrambled to adjust. Studios quietly reviewed old NDAs and statements issued after past controversies. Networks that had once ignored similar moments of disrespect in interviews began updating their editorial standards. A-list celebrities canceled appearances on shows known for baiting guests with loaded questions. Producers were scared. And for once, they weren't scared of ratings. They were scared of consequence. Meanwhile, a quiet ripple moved through the industry. Black women in entertainment began speaking up. Not in rage, not in chaos, but with calm, clear voices. Voices that had always been there, but were finally being heard. And in that shift, something beautiful began to grow. Janet's team announced a scholarship fund in her name, the Erased Voice Grant for young women of color entering journalism, media, and entertainment law. Not a concert tour, not a brand. Just an invitation for others to reclaim their stories before someone else tried to write them. Within 48 hours, the fund was overwhelmed with donations. Famous names signed checks quietly. Oprah, Beyoncé, Ava DuVernay. Even executives who once benefited from her silence now publicly supported the cause. As if trying to earn back the dignity they'd helped bury. But Janet didn't attend the fund's launch. She didn't stand on stage or give a tearful thank you speech. Instead, she sent a letter handwritten, signed, and read by a young woman studying journalism in Georgia. It said, "To the ones who stayed quiet when it hurt. To the ones who lowered their voices in rooms too loud to hear truth. To the ones who were told to smile, nod, and disappear. You don't owe the world a performance. You owe it your truth. Say it or walk out. That's power too." That quote made headlines again. By now, The View had officially ended. Joy Behar issued one last public statement, calling it the most painful misread of my career. She said she had learned from it. Some believed her. Some didn't, but no one asked Janet to respond. Because they all knew she wouldn't. She had spoken once. That was enough. On the one-year anniversary of the broadcast, fans held a silent vigil outside the ABC studios where The View was once filmed. No shouting, no performances, just candles. Signs, songs playing softly from Janet's discography. The ones that never made radio charts but carried deeper truth. That night, young girls stood at the front, holding a sign that read, "She didn't shout, she didn't beg, she just stood up." And in one small home, far from the cameras, Janet Jackson stood at her window, watching the stars. No spotlight, no music, no press, just silence. The same silence that once buried her, now standing as proof that she had never really disappeared. She had simply waited for the world to be ready to listen. And finally it was. By the end of that week, The View's studio no longer felt like a talk show, it felt like a courtroom. Every word spoken on that set since Janet Jackson walked off was now under review. Legal teams were analyzing footage. Producers were being questioned behind closed doors. Advertisers had started pulling their spots from upcoming episodes. And inside the network's executive wing, the pressure had finally broken through. Martin Red, the longtime executive producer, stood in front of a full room of ABC board members. His face was pale, his voice tight, but his message was blunt. This isn't just a PR issue. This is a cultural fracture. Someone across the table asked, "So, what's your solution?" Martin looked straight at them and said, "We give Janet the last word." Dead silence followed. "You want her back on the show?" another voice asked, surprised. "No," Martin said quickly. "We'll offer her a primetime special. No panel, no interruptions. It's just her voice. If she says yes, we air it. If she says no, we air nothing. But we offer it, and we do it publicly." The room didn't cheer, but no one said no. That night, the network released a single-line press release. In response to recent events, ABC has formally invited Ms. Janet Jackson to speak freely and uninterrupted in a televised special at her discretion and on her terms. The internet exploded again. The hashtag Janet on her terms began trending immediately, and still Janet said nothing. Behind the scenes, her manager was fielding offers from every major network: CBS, NBC, even Netflix, but she hadn't returned their calls yet. She was watching, waiting, not for attention, but for sincerity. Meanwhile, the protest in Union Square had spread to other cities. Small gatherings in Los Angeles, Atlanta, London, even Tokyo. It wasn't just about Janet anymore. It was about the way Black women were handled in media, questioned without care, pushed into silence, or forced to explain themselves with perfect grace. Online, old clips began resurfacing, interviews where Black women were interrupted, dismissed, or misquoted. Comment sections filled with personal stories. Former staffers from major shows began leaking behind the scenes, behavior they'd kept quiet about for years. The movement had a name now. #muted no more. Back at The View, the atmosphere was brittle. Joy Behar had been asked to take a temporary leave from the show officially for health and personal reasons, but everyone knew why. She hadn't given interviews. Her silence was her only defense now. In the dressing rooms, Whoopi sat alone one afternoon, scrolling through her phone until she stopped on a video clip. It was from 20 years earlier. A young Janet Jackson, smiling nervously on a morning show, answering a question about criticism. "I try not to let it get to me," she had said. "I just focus on the music." Whoopi closed her eyes. That wasn't strength. That was survival. That same day, Janet finally broke her silence. She posted a photo not of herself, but of a handwritten note. It wasn't polished. It wasn't a PR statement. It looked like it came from a journal. "You ask a woman to sit at your table, but you don't bring a seat. You bring a spotlight. And then wonder why she walks away." Nothing more. No caption. No tag. The post crossed 100 million views in 8 hours. Celebrities reposted it. Activists quoted it. Teachers used it in classrooms, and then the message from Janet's team came quietly to ABC. She accepts the special. She will speak. She chooses the date. No interviews. No conditions, just Janet. The network cleared a Friday night slot 8 p.m. Eastern, canceling 2 full hours of scheduled programming. Sponsors rushed to buy space. Ratings forecasts went through the roof, but the network didn't promote it like an event. They used Janet's own words in every promo. No script, no edits. Just truth. When the night arrived, everything else stopped. Cities dimmed. Social media paused. On screen, it opened with one wide shot. It's Janet sitting in a chair, surrounded by soft shadows. No host in sight. Just her. She looked into the camera. And for a long moment, she said nothing. Just stared, calm, unshaken. Present. Then she spoke. I wasn't supposed to be here tonight. I was supposed to stay quiet. That's what they always count on. And she kept going. She talked about being 19 and told to smile more. About being 35 and told she should be grateful after the Super Bowl. About being 57 and realizing that every room she entered had already written her ending before she opened her mouth. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just told the truth. And for the first time in decades, no one interrupted her. When it ended, the screen went black. No credits. No music. Just silence. And that silence echoed louder than applause ever could. After the special aired, everything changed the next morning. Major headlines didn't read like entertainment gossip. They read like a national reckoning. Janet Jackson rewrites the rules of silence appeared in bold across the Washington Post. CNN called it a cultural reset. Even Fox News, known for spinning stories differently, cautiously labeled it unscripted and unapologetic. Wasn't just what Janet had said, it was how she said it. Calm, truthful, without spin. No rage, no retaliation. Just a voice that had waited 2 decades for a microphone that wouldn't be turned off for once. America didn't look away. The following week, politicians began addressing the broader fallout. Senator Layla Thomas from Michigan stood on the Senate floor and referenced Janet's story while discussing the media. Fairness, accountability, bill legislation that had been stalled for years. Suddenly, it had traction. Even conservative representatives who previously dismissed the bill as performative were now carefully watching their words. They couldn't afford to sound dismissive not after that broadcast. Meanwhile, the View was in chaos. Ratings had dropped 17% in 1 week. A major sponsor pulled their funding, issuing a quiet statement about respecting public sentiment. Joy Behar remained off-air. Sunny Hostin apologized on her podcast, saying she should have spoken up when the tone of the interview shifted. Anna Navarro remained silent until a TMZ camera caught her outside a Manhattan restaurant and asked, "Do you regret not defending Janet Jackson?" She paused for a moment, then looked directly into the lens and said, "Yes." Behind the scenes, producers debated canceling the show's next season entirely. Advertisers were fleeing. Audience attendance had dropped. Social media users were calling it The View's final season. But Janet didn't speak again. She disappeared from the press cycle. No follow-up interviews, no thank you posts. She had said what she came to say. Now she was done. Except something strange began happening. Young artists started naming her as an influence openly. TikTok was flooded with users dancing to her old songs, not for nostalgia, but to celebrate her voice. Protest murals appeared in Brooklyn, Detroit, and even Berlin, showing a silhouette of Janet walking away from a table, her back straight. Her mic on the floor. Below each mural, the words, "She walked so we could speak." One morning, a letter appeared in the New York Times, a full-page open apology. Signed by over 200 industry leaders, producers, publicists, managers, editors, all acknowledging their part in what they called the cultural erasure of women who were inconvenient to protect. The apology didn't fix anything, but it was the first time one had ever come to as this. Wave grew, conversations started happening on news panels, in universities, and inside media companies. Women who had been silenced for years were being re-interviewed. Old tapes were being reviewed with new eyes. One former MTV executive even admitted in a documentary that their handling of the Super Bowl fallout was cowardly and commercially motivated. The quote went viral. At the same time, Janet received an invitation to speak at the United Nations Women's Summit in Geneva. She declined instead. She issued a short message through her team. "Let others take the stage now. I have spoken. The world is listening. Let the rest speak their truths, too." The message sparked another viral moment. But this time, it wasn't about Janet. It was about every woman who had ever been silenced in a boardroom, a newsroom, a dressing room, or an interview chair. Meanwhile, inside ABC's headquarters, a decision was quietly being finalized. The View would end with its current season. Not because of low ratings, but because, as one internal memo read, the format has outlived its ability to host truth without interruption. One last episode was scheduled. No panel, no live audience, just one empty table, one light, and 1 hour of silence. ABC aired it without commercials. Across the country, millions tuned in to watch. Nothing. Just the table where so many had been talked over, misunderstood, and dismissed. That empty space, for the first time, said more than any voice could. And in a quiet house in Los Angeles, Janet Jackson sat alone, away from cameras, watching. The final broadcast, she didn't smile. She didn't cry.